Hi, I'm Backspin, and this is the Teenage Engineering Pocket Operator PO-20 Arcade. Now, this is a little device I've gotten a couple questions about, especially because I tend to make fairly heavy use of it during some of my desktop jams and during some of my jams with some of my little desktop devices and some of my portable stuff. And I can't blame people for asking questions. While there are a lot of tutorials on things, it's not exactly an intuitive device. You've got a lot of varying different symbols here and a whole bunch of numbers, and packing this much functionality into such a tiny machine is going to lead to a little bit of confusion. So my goal here is to try and help dispel a little bit of that. So to start out, I want to point out that this thing should be thought of as sort of a drum machine sequencer attached to some percussive sounds and a fair amount of other melodic sounds as well, with a separate chord sequencer. And we'll break down what that means in a little bit. But for now, let's get to the utility stuff. Extremely basic stuff to start out with. Your BPM control here controls your volume, because when you hold it down, you've got this whole thing. If you're running this into other pocket operators, keep it at 8, probably not much higher, or else it'll usually distort. But if you're running into something else that can handle decently high volume output, you can usually keep it at the full 16. Now, the other thing is you can hold BPM and move your right knob in order to get a tempo control of 60 BPM all the way up to 240. But you usually want to keep it somewhere in the middle. You can also just hit it and it'll throw a whole bunch of different BPM settings at you. Hip hop, I think, is 80. There's techno at 120 and 140. Yeah, and then you've got swing as your left knob. You've got a parameter that goes from 100 to 0. Swing is swing. You adjust it to taste. You've got your pattern sequencer here. When you hold this, all your other varying lights light up, and anything that doesn't have a light in here has no data in there. But stuff that does have data in there, you can select, and it will start playing that. Now, the fun part is you can chain patterns on this thing to an absurd degree. I think it's something like 128 patterns is the upper limit for what you can chain together before it will just loop back to the very first one. The other fun part is you can chain the same version of multiple patterns multiple times. In this case, I'll select this. I'll go back in a pattern. I'll select this twice and then this twice. And then when I hit play, and it'll play the first pattern twice and the second pattern twice. You can sit there and chain it again to an absurd degree, and the same pattern chaining capability applies to the chord mode as well, which is quite useful. All right, now that we've got the basics out of the way, let's actually build a pattern. So I'm going to hit my pattern button. I'm going to pick a blank space. I'm going to head to slot 1 in this case. And we're going to start laying down some patterns. Now, the first thing you want to do is be conscious where your sounds are. You've got mostly percussion stuff up top, and you've got most of your melodic stuff down below. You've got, a bass note over here, and you've got this thing over here that can technically be tuned chromatically. You've got, a bass note over here, and you've got this thing over here that can technically be tuned chromatically, but the rest of this is all drum-ish stuff. And then down here is all your melodic stuff. So you want to pick a sound. In this case, I'm going to hold sound. I'm going to pick my kick drum here over at slot number 2. And this means if I hit right, I can go in here and I can just plug in some drums. And then while still in right mode with this little icon right here, I can hold sound again, and I can go into my snare section, and you'll notice all of my plugged in sounds go away because I haven't plugged anything in on the snare yet. So I can plug in a snare here and here. And now if I hit play, we've got a very basic drum beat. So if I turn right off though, there's still another way I can get sounds into the pattern, which is I can hold right, and I can actually live play in samples, or the sounds. So in this case, I'm gonna play in the bass. Yeah, this is a little slow. Let's turn this up a little bit. There we go, a little bit better. Now I'm gonna sit here and maybe plug in some melody. And then if I want to add some stuff in, I can go over here, check this sound over here that I played in. Now, the one thing you'll notice if you've seen the jam so far, that was at the beginning of this video, is you'll sit there and go, okay, there are a couple different sounds here, but you haven't got anything gone crazy melodic. How do you do that? And that's going to be the other fun part of sequencing, which is motion sequencing, and something that this pocket operator can do that the ones before it couldn't, which is per step motion sequencing or per step parameter locks. It's actually really cool. So let's go over motion sequencing. Let's see here for the bass in this case. If I hit play and let this run and I hold down the right button, for each sound, right, you've got, let me turn off right mode and demo this. For each sound, you've got two parameters, and it's assigned to one of these two knobs. The left knob is always something pitch related, and the right knob is always something timbral, right? So there's your timbre change. And there's your pitch change, right? So something interesting that you can do is in right mode, you can hold down right with the sound you have selected. So I already have my bass selected, and change this. And now that change over the course of the pattern is saved. It's something that this will do automatically. But what if I want to change pitches, for example? Well, let's go over here. You can hold down each of these. And in this case, this is one of the sounds that I've got that's chromatic, so I can sit here. And I can change each of these. And you've got a little melody going. So let me point something out here so far. There are two broader categories of sounds, which are the percussive stuff that I showed, which is up at the top of the device, and the melodic stuff that's down on the bottom. But there's a lot of the melodic stuff in here that plays into the chord side of things, which is its own separate sequencer. This would be the bass. I can't actually sequence this other than making it drop up or down an octave. There's this particular arp here, and this arp over here. While it can be sequenced chromatically for where it's going to start, the arp, aside from that, is always in key. Those are always going to change according to what chord you have selected in here. And this is the fun part. Each of these is a different chord, and you can chain up chords the same way you can chain patterns. So if you hold pattern, for example, and say, I don't know, press this twice and this twice, you've now created a 4-pattern chain that plays this pattern twice and then this pattern twice. Fairly straightforward. You'll hear that the bass is changing its pitch though, and that's not something that you have access to be able to sequence, or at least not the same way you could sequence other things that work up and down the diatonic scale, like your main lead voices down here or a couple of the arpeggios. Now, the reason that this is the case is that's locked to whatever chord you're playing. So if we go over here, this is a little chord sequence I've got going that I can plug in, and it's cycling through each of these chords during a new bar. You can actually bring up a chord drone in order to hear this. You can hold chord, or you can actually do this from the effects page. But you can hold chord and turn the left knob. And you can hear the chords. You can also turn the right knob. And that's the amount of side chain pumping that goes on. You can also just turn this off because some of your stuff will play along with that chord. You hear how this one's always changing? Same deal with that one. Those ones are ones that are locked to always stay in whatever key you have this pocket operator running at, and that's something important to keep in mind. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that any of the other ones you can sequence per note are locked from A1 here. You can go all the way up to A2, and you can go all the way up to A3 if you want. So you have capability to change things however you'd like. All right, now for the fun part. We get to talk about the effects. So the effects are a thing that you can access by holding down this effects button here, and each one of these different buttons now accesses a different effect. These are actually broken down fairly easily. You've got mutes of varying kinds across the top. You've got the filters across the bottom. And these are toggle. You turn them on and then you can turn them off. The things around here are mostly retriggers. These two specifically, 9 and 10, are drum retriggers, and then 11, 12, 13, and 14 are retriggers for the melodic content, and then you've got 15, which is a kind of gating effect, and 16 is my favorite. It's the rising arpeggio that you can play. So let me demo this a little bit. Let me get a pattern running here. So this one mutes most everything except for some of your arpeggios and a couple bits of your percussion. It mutes your kick and your snare at the very least. Now, these ones also, you can turn up your chord drone, and it won't be muted by this or this one. This one gives you more of your leads back. This gives you mostly your drums. It mutes your chord drone. Same deal with this one. This one gives you your bass back, though. Filters are filters. You've got low pass and low pass sweep, and high pass and high pass sweep. The important thing to note is you'll hear that this is distorting a little bit, and that's because the pocket operator is actually overdriving its own filter. If I turn this down a little bit, as I turn it up, you'll hear some of that distortion start to come back. This is just part of how the pocket operators are built. You do want to keep it in mind a little bit, but at the same time, it's a cool technique you can use. Taking something like the PO-20 or something like that and running it straight into that filter can cause some pretty cool effects. You've got sweeps, and this sweep will keep going until you decide to turn it off. High pass is the same thing, only it's less obvious any distortion that might be here. So if I turn this all up to full volume, you're not going to hear nearly as much distortion. It's just less obvious. Drum retriggers. These turn off at the end of the bar. And you can turn them off beforehand by hitting them again. There's your gate effect. And the arpeggio plays up and will play until the end of the bar, and will end always at the end of the bar. So, if you sit there and you decide to play this, you can get some interesting sounds out of this by just timing. By timing when you hit it, and you'll get some pretty interesting kinds of sounds. And I love this thing to death. It's a wonderful little groove box, but I find it really shines. It plays really, really well with friends, like, say, like a Volca. Now, pocket operators can sync to external gear that aren't other pocket operators, but there are a few things to keep in mind about how to do this. The first is the sync rate. Pocket operators can take a kick, a click, or a clock sync signal through their input jack, and they can read it at a rate of 2 pulses per quarter note, basically 1 pulse every 8th note. This is the same standard rate that Korg Volcas use, and most machines with clock sync can change the rate to work at the same sync rate, but you want to keep that in mind when using it with some external gear. I have a mono station and a drum brute impact here, and they use different clock sync rates, so every so often you want to just double check your sync settings. Case in point, I'll demo this by starting up the Volca here, and for right now the sync out is running to the sync in, and I have this set to SY2. SY0 just runs the sync click out this way with no processing. SY2 is the one you want to go for. SY1 sets it to one side and spits out audio at the other end. This is the one where it just assumes only sync is coming in and other stuff is getting spit back out. So if you're using it with a Volca, SY2 is the setting you want to use. Anyways, I can hit play, and this is now operating in lockstep with this. Fairly straightforward. But if I go and I load up a track where I've got a kick drum every quarter note instead of the same clock sync thing, and I send that to the pocket operator, I can hit play here. Haven't changed the tempo. And now it's running at half speed, because this is running basically what would be 1 pulse per quarter note instead of 2. So if I add in, you also do have to be careful of what samples you tend to use. Certain kick drums work better than others. But I can just go here into the sync out here. So that's the main thing you got to keep in mind when it comes to syncing this with the external gear. This will also work with things like everyone's favorite $100 little synth box. These two play really nice with each other. But yeah, you've got sync in and out on this thing, and this runs the same Korg standard, so you can sync this together. Again, I've mentioned I've got a mono station that I use this with. You can absolutely sync this thing with a lot of extra external gear. You just have to keep the clock rate in mind. Alright, now for the more complicated part, which is syncing this with other pocket operators. In this case, I'm syncing it with the PO-20 rhythm, and this is the only other pocket operator I have, so I will go over if there were a third one in the center chain, but I can't demo that because I don't have a third one to demo it with. But long story short, you need a master sort of pocket operator that you're going to sync everything else to, and then the rest are going to be the ones that are going to be slave to the sync clock. So these things have an input and an output, and you can split this output through stereo. Normally, this is technically just cloned mono. Very few of these pocket operators actually do anything in stereo. The reason for that is that the way they sync these is you can sit there and push these into different sync modes. Everything by default is in a mode called SY0. That means things that go into the input come through here, are processed by any filtering or whatever that the pocket operator is capable of doing to it, and then it gets spit right back out the other side with nothing done to them. SY1 takes this stereo jack signal and splits it into 2 different sides. You've got one side that's sending out sync clock, and the other one is spitting out the actual audio that this thing generates. Then you come over here to this, and you've got a bunch of different sync options on this thing. And you don't want to do SY0 or SY1. SY2 is if you're doing things with Volcas, so you want SY4 in the center here. Case in point, I can hit play here, and you're hearing sound pass through this, but you're not hearing this annoying click thing. Watch if I go to SY5, you can hear that weird clicky sound. Same deal with SY3. Now, this means that this thing is reading two different signals here. It's reading sync on one channel, and it's reading the actual audio on the other, and the audio is getting passed through, but the sync is what is putting this in lockstep. Now, the interesting thing about all of this is that you can then take this and put this in SY5, I believe. And what you've got is you've got everything in here being routed to one channel, and then you've got this thing spitting out sync clock. There is an SY3 on here, and that's where only sync is coming in, and this is spitting out sync and signal to another thing. So you can have a Volca that you can slave, say, this thing to, and then you can run that to this using sync clock from this, and keep chaining things however you want. But the end goal is that 4 is the thing that you want this to be on, because then you don't get any click track, and these things run in sync with each other. Alright, pros and cons. I'll start with the cons first. This thing is fairly restrictive. You're only stuck with, A minor, C major, maybe occasionally something weird like D Dorian if you want to get really creative with how you're going to sequence things, but for the most part, you are stuck to only the white keys on the piano. There's no accidentals, which I can see being a deal breaker for some people. There is also the fact that it's got a very specific, distinctive sound. It's 8-bit. This means that its drums aren't necessarily always the beefiest thing in the world, and some of its percussive sounds can be kind of noisy. It's small. It's not exactly a super intuitive thing at first glance. Looking at this and going, oh, how do I do this? I can't memorize all 16 chords, and no, I need to look at the manual in order to get the effects. That's something you're kind of going to go through every time. I still don't have all the chords memorized. Pros, though. This thing's got an absurd amount of pattern chaining. It does still have a line-in. You can sync it to external gear. You've got the chord drone, which is really, really nice. Its distinctive sound can also be a pro if you want something that sounds very 8-bit out and about. This is something that can easily get you into that territory. You've got a decent bank of effects to be able to do live performance with this thing, and you've got the fact that this thing plays fantastically with friends. If I have any recommendations, it would probably be that if you're going to pick one of these up, pick up something else to play along with this, be it Volca or something like, say, an NTS-1. This thing is my favorite effects box to use with this, guys. These two play really nice together. It's like chocolate and peanut butter. It's fantastic. The other thing I'd recommend if you're going to pick one of these up is play with it. Don't just sit there and be like, I want to make music with it. Play with it. This thing sets a specific framework down in front of you that lets you kind of just hit the ground and works best when you're just noodling around, trying to kind of play around, and then eventually ideas will come out of it. And it's a fantastic machine for exactly that reason. So if you take the time to learn it and pair it with the right pieces of gear, I think that this can be a very, very, very fun piece of gear. Anyways, I've been Backspin. I hope this has been of some help to any of y'all that are either looking at PO-20 or have one of these and are looking to understand it a little better. Yeah, go out and make music. Have fun with all the 8-bitty nonsense that this thing may bring with you. And have a good one.